Hi everyone, Laura here, and today I'll be talking about REDS, or REDS, which stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sports. Reason why I chose this topic is because it is something that affected me personally, and all that REDS is inadequate nutrition, basically not enough calories intake to sustain the training. So calories in is less than calories out. It is, though, different from eating disorders like anorexia because the undernutrition is not always conscious. Secondly, these athletes with REDS don't lose a lot of weight because of the sustained training. So what happens is, because the calorie intake is less than the calorie output, the body is forced to, save energy somehow. And the way it does this, it reduces a lot of basic metabolic functions. RED comes from deficient energy availability because of the calories expended in training. So the body slows down metabolic function. The reason why, though, these athletes might not be eating enough is many times is actually unconscious. However, there are some cases where it stems from an eating disorder. The way REDS is actually calculated or defined is dietary energy intake minus energy expenditure through training divided by body mass. REDS is most common in sports where athletes are aesthetically judged. Examples are bodybuilding, gymnastics, figure skating, and then sports where weight is important, sports where you have to hit a certain weight. And then cardio sports, so biking, skiing, running are also very common. REDS hasn't always been known about. It was in the 1980s when they started doing research on the female triad. Basically, they were observing that physically active females were to lose their period. They'd suffer low energy levels and also noticed that they had reduced bone density. The reduced bone density they found was linked to the drop in estrogen. And the problem with bone density is that it peaks between 18 and 22 years old. And there's a lot of young athletes out there that go through REDS right in that critical stage of life. Therefore, their bone health never really recovers. Initially, some of the studies were looking at how it affects the lower back bone density, and that's where most bone density is lost. But later studies also found that it affects weight-bearing bones. Because of this, athletes that have REDS for a sustained period of time have experienced fractures in their bones, whether it's microfractures or full fractures. A well-common story is that of Mary Kane, who experienced 5 fractures in just 1 year's time. Last thing about bone density was a study that I found that compared gymnasts to long-distance runners. And although the people involved in the study had similar percent of body fat, they found that runners actually experienced significantly worse bone loss than the gymnasts. REDS is an expansion beyond the female triad. It doesn't just affect females, it doesn't just affect energy, menstruation, and bone density, but it affects a multitude of organ systems. It is a syndrome. It was just in 2014 when REDS was introduced by the International Olympic Committee as a syndrome that athletes can undergo. And here's some of the many ways it affects the body. With males, the drop in testosterone does directly correlate to reduced performance. And so the way this was treated in the past, before REDS was recognized, is by an add-back hormone method, which is basically doping if you're giving someone additional testosterone, but it was just so that their testosterone levels could be back to normal. However, it doesn't address the root cause of the problem, so the athletes would still suffer all the other side effects. Reason for this is because when someone is under REDS, they lack the energy available to sustain all their metabolic functions, and this includes the cardiovascular system, and RED leads to increased and in fact even dangerous levels of cholesterol and low density lipoproteins, which are linked to heart disease. Then also their heart rate is significantly lower than normal because the body's just much lower metabolic states, trying to preserve energy wherever it can. Normal heart rate is 60 to 70 beats per minute when you're resting. Some of these athletes have even 30 beats per minute. which is significantly low, and this can be used as one of the signs to diagnose REDS. This reduced energy availability affects also the immune system. So now you don't have enough energy to sustain immunity, you're getting sick all the time. You don't have energy to recover from the training, so you suffer injuries more often, and also you get reduced benefits, reduced response to the training. So athletes with REDS usually decrease in performance throughout the season compared to healthy athletes, which increase their performance through a season. So just that alone, you can imagine, has impacts on the athlete's mental health. You know, they work really hard every day, and yet they're just getting worse and worse, and they're injured and they're sick all the time. But REDS does directly impact mental health as well. It leads to mood swings, to decreased concentration, to sleep disturbance, to increased need for social approval. At the same time, it also increases isolation, and all these things negatively impact mental health, can lead to depression, and with this also suicidal thoughts. The final way it affects mental health, which is very strange, I find, is that it actually leads athletes to develop eating disorders. So maybe, you know, their lack of energy availability was unconscious, and now because they have REDS, they're also developing an eating disorder. Last few more physical ways that REDS affects the body is there's reduced gene expression in some cases. The body can't respond to the training, but then also reduced enzyme production for digestion, very poor energy metabolism altogether. So not only the body has to lower metabolism, but doesn't even have enough energy to run metabolism properly. So you're wondering what the treatments are for REDS, and it's super simple. All you have to do is eat more, and just not running your body in this calorie deficit can fairly quickly restore health. Research that I looked at found that 40% of professional athletes in the sports I talked about before suffer REDS, which is an astoundingly high number. And however, it is most common in female than it is in males. Part of this is because females need to carry a higher percent of body fat. The problem with treating REDS, and the reason why it is so prevalent even in professional sports, is because there's a lack of knowledge, both in coaches, especially in athletes, and even some cases in doctors. And so REDS can go undiagnosed and unnoticed for years at a time. In my case, I had REDS for a little over a year, and I presented my symptoms to my family doctor, who never heard of REDS before. She wasn't able to help me. A lot of the people in my everyday life weren't able to recognize the signs either, because they're very subtle unless you're experiencing them yourself. And finally, I found a doctor who told me, don't worry so much about low iron or low calcium. The reason why you're getting sick and you're tired and you have this terrible bone health is because of a calorie deficit altogether, not only these micronutrients. And so I went from having poor focus and even crying myself to sleep many nights to being almost back to normal after a few months. One last thing is I want to talk a little bit more about the mental aspect. And it's really easy for these athletes to feel alone. I can speak from personal experience, and truly I was blaming myself for everything, for my poor performance, both in sports and school. In my case, it was unconscious underfueling for the sport that developed REDS, which made me develop disordered eating. And because of this, the solution to my problem was quite easy. The doctor just told me, you need to eat more, and it literally solved all my problems. However, if the problem did stem from disordered eating in the first place, then obviously the treatment approach has to be more comprehensive and individualized to the athlete. There is another problem out there, and it's the information availability online. When you search of weight in my case for runners, you find, oh yes, being lighter is and more lean is correlated with better racing times. And so whenever I'm searching something, oh, maybe my nutrition's not right, all I find is, oh, you just have to be leaner and then you'll perform better, which make the problem even worse. And a lot of the information is more towards the general population. Even doctors will say that losing your period because of increased physical activity is quote unquote normal. And so if your doctor tells that to you, I hope you do consult someone else, because it truly is not. It's common, unfortunately, but not normal. So I believe RED-S is almost a systemic problem. They have to change the approach to training. It is more common in females, and females can't be expected to respond the same way to weight cuts or training as men do. And the language around a lot of sports has to change. There shouldn't be this expectation or this stereotype that you have to be really lean to be successful in certain sports, although there is truth in it, and weight is very important for endurance sports and obviously for sports where you have to meet a weight class. We have to be aware and inform, especially young athletes, of the negative consequences that RED-S has on their bodies and lifelong consequences. The mental health effects, the poor relationship that is built with food when you're going through RED-S is something that you will have to live with and work with for the rest of your life. As I mentioned, bone density in some cases never really recovers. Any kind of injury, because you're more prone to injuries during RED-S, if you dislocate your shoulder, that shoulder is going to be messed up for the rest of your life. Lastly, and this is more in extreme cases, but you could become sterile. And so it's really important for coaches, for family members, friends, and especially athletes to be informed on RED-S. I encourage people, even that, such as parents, that don't necessarily require a safe sport certification, to get a safe sport certification so that they're aware of the dangers that are involved in competitive sports. Knowledge really is power, and I hope you learn something by watching my video, and through this knowledge you're able to recognize all these subtle signs and empower the people around you on the dangers of RED-S. Spread the knowledge. I hope you break the stigma. I hope we break the stereotypes, because sport should be fun and should be healthy, should be something that brings people together, not something that drives people apart and into isolation. Use the knowledge as you wish and help those around you.